ancient libraries and lost scrolls. Soft opening. Welcome to the Sleepy Archive, a quiet place for learning at the edge of rest. This is a dark screen sleep audio episode. After the opening card, the screen will gently fade to black, so you can rest your eyes while the story continues. Tonight, we will wander slowly through ancient libraries and lost scrolls. We will not treat them as mysteries to be solved in a hurry, or as treasures to be seized from the past. Instead, we will imagine them as rooms of patient labor, shelves and niches, rolls of papyrus and parchment, clay tablets drying in the sun, ink settling into fibers, and hands carefully tying cords around a text that someone hoped would last. A library can be a grand building, but it can also be a cupboard, a chest, a set of baskets, a storeroom in a temple, or a small archive kept beside a household shrine. In the ancient world, books were not weightless things. They had bodies. A text might be pressed into clay, scratched on wax, painted on papyrus, copied on parchment, or carved into stone. It could be rolled, folded, stacked, tagged, sealed, shelved, buried, burned, repaired, translated, summarized, or forgotten. The libraries we visit tonight belong to many places: Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, Rome, the deserts near the Dead Sea, and the monasteries and scriptoria that inherited fragments of older worlds. Some were royal collections. Some were scholarly workshops. Some were administrative archives where officials recorded taxes, grain, land, and letters. Some were religious communities preserving rules, hymns, and interpretations. Many of their contents have disappeared, and yet the idea of them remains. The calm human wish to gather memory in one place. We will move at a gentle pace. There will be no alarm in the losses, only a soft awareness that history is fragile. Fire, damp, insects, war, neglect, changing languages, and ordinary use have carried away countless words. But survival can be quiet and surprising. A clay tablet can sleep under ruins for 2,000 years. A scroll can rest in a desert cave. A page can be scraped and reused and still leave a ghost of its earlier writing beneath the new. So settle in. Let your breathing slow. Picture a dim room after sunset. A lamp burns low. A scribe lays down a reed pen. Somewhere in the shelves, a scroll waits in silence. The archive opens, and our night among ancient libraries begins. Writing before the shelf. Before we enter a library, we should pause with writing itself. The earliest libraries were not born from leisure reading in the modern sense. They grew out of administration, ritual, memory, law, and power. People needed to count, name, promise, command, preserve, and recall. The first written objects were often practical, records of grain, sheep, labor, offerings, or land. A library, at its root, is not only a home for stories. It is a way of helping a society remember what it has done. In ancient Mesopotamia, writing developed in the late 4th millennium BCE, first in pictorial and numerical forms, and then in the wedge-shaped signs we call cuneiform. The material was humble and strong. Clay. A scribe pressed a stylus into a damp tablet, making marks that were at once small and deliberate. If the tablet was meant for temporary use, it could remain unfired and eventually crumble. If it was baked by intention, accident, or the heat of destruction, it might become astonishingly durable. That is one of history's quiet ironies. Fire that destroyed a building could harden the tablets inside it and help them survive. Clay tablets made a different kind of library from papyrus scrolls. They were heavy, compact, and sometimes shaped for the hand. They could be organized in baskets, jars, wooden shelves, or rooms with labels. Many carried colophons, little notes at the end naming the scribe, the owner, the series, or the tablet's place in a sequence. A tablet might be one part of a larger work, just as one quiet page can belong to a long book. Writing also developed in Egypt, where hieroglyphs and hieratic scripts served monumental, religious, and administrative needs. Egypt's landscape offered papyrus, made from the pith of a plant that grew along the Nile. Papyrus sheets could be joined into rolls, creating a graceful medium for letters, accounts, hymns, stories, medical texts, and rituals for the dead. Compared with clay, papyrus was light and elegant. It could travel well, but it did not survive well in damp climates. Much of what has come down to us from Egypt survived because dryness was kind. The materials mattered because they shaped habits of reading and keeping. A clay tablet could be held like a small object of earth. A papyrus roll had to be unrolled and re-rolled, revealing columns of writing in sequence. A wax tablet could be erased and used again. A stone inscription made a public statement meant to resist time. A wooden writing board could serve daily work and then vanish almost completely. We should also remember that ancient literacy was not evenly shared. Scribes trained for years. Writing belonged to institutions, temples, palaces, workshops, courts, and schools. To copy a text was labor. To maintain a collection required space, materials, knowledge, and authority. A library was therefore both a practical tool and a sign of order. It said, "These words matter enough to keep." Tonight, when we imagine shelves and scrolls, we are also imagining the people who made them possible. Reed cutters, papyrus makers, parchment workers, ink makers, scribes, teachers, translators, servants, librarians, patrons, and readers. The library begins with a hand making a mark, and another hand deciding not to let that mark disappear. Clay tablets at Nineveh, one of the most evocative ancient collections, belonged to Ashurbanipal, king of Assyria in the 7th century BCE. His capital at Nineveh, near modern Mosul in Iraq, held a royal library whose remains have given modern scholars thousands of cuneiform tablets and fragments. It was not a library of silence in our familiar modern style. It was part of a palace world, royal power, scholarship, divination, ritual, administration, and the ambitions of empire. Ashurbanipal presented himself as a king who could read and understand learned texts. Whether we imagine him personally studying every tablet or relying on a network of scholars, the collection gathered an extraordinary range of writings. There were lexical lists, omens, medical texts, prayers, rituals, astronomical observations, incantations, royal inscriptions, and literary works. Among the most famous is the Epic of Gilgamesh, a much older Mesopotamian story preserved in copies and fragments, with its meditations on friendship, grief, kingship, and mortality. The library was built by collecting and copying. Scholars were instructed to find texts from older centers of learning, especially in Babylonia, and send them to the Assyrian court. Some tablets bear notes indicating that they belonged to the palace of Ashurbanipal. Others are school exercises, copies, or fragments of series. The collection reminds us that ancient knowledge was often organized in sequences. A divinatory series might run across many tablets. A dictionary-like list might be copied because the training of scribes depended on inherited order. Imagine one of the tablet rooms at night. The palace has quieted. The air is still. Clay tablets rest in groups, perhaps once stored on shelves or in containers that have long since decayed. Each tablet is a small landscape of wedges. The signs run line by line, carrying instructions for rituals, descriptions of eclipses, lists of rare words, and stories of ancient kings. Some tablets are neat and formal. Others are broken, chipped, or darkened by fire. The destruction of Nineveh in 612 BCE was a catastrophe for Assyrian power, but it also helped preserve parts of the library. Buildings collapsed, fires burned, the empire ended, yet the clay tablets, baked and buried, waited. When 19th century excavators uncovered them, they found not a complete library in the way its keepers knew it, but a field of fragments. Modern scholars have spent generations joining, reading, cataloging, and translating those fragments. A broken corner found in one tray may fit a piece found decades earlier. The library continues to be assembled in the present. There is something restful in thinking of clay tablets as sleeping earth. Unlike papyrus, they are not thin and delicate. They have weight. They are marked mud transformed into memory. Their survival is uneven, but their durability is remarkable. Through them, we can hear not only kings and myths, but the routines of scholars who watched the sky, interpreted signs, taught students, and copied old words with care. Nineveh also reminds us that libraries are not neutral containers. They reflect the interests of those who gather them. Ashurbanipal's collection served a royal center that valued knowledge as a form of protection and authority. Omens could guide decisions. Rituals could avert danger. Ancient stories could frame kingship. Lists could train officials. A library could make the empire feel legible, even when the world beyond it remained uncertain. As we leave Nineveh, let the tablets settle back into their dim room. The palace is gone, but the wedges remain. Small signs pressed by ancient hands still hold their shape, as if the earth itself were whispering through sleep. Houses of life along the Nile. In ancient Egypt, libraries and archives were often connected with temples, administrative offices, and institutions, sometimes called houses of life. The Egyptian term, usually rendered parank, suggests a place of learning, copying, ritual knowledge, and sacred texts. We should be cautious, because our evidence is incomplete and the phrase may have changed in meaning over time. But it gives us a gentle image, a house where life is preserved through words. Egyptian writing moved through several scripts. Hieroglyphs appeared on monuments and sacred surfaces, while hieratic, a more cursive script, served many practical and literary purposes. Later, Demotic would become important for everyday and legal writing. The materials ranged from stone and tomb walls to wooden boards, ostraca, linen, leather, and papyrus. Papyrus, above all, gives Egyptian textual culture its familiar shape. A roll held in the hands, a line of ink traveling across a pale surface, columns unfolding as the reader moves from one section to the next. Temples needed texts. Rituals had to be performed correctly. Calendars, offerings, hymns, medical recipes, mathematical problems, astronomical observations, and funerary compositions all belonged to the world of learned writing. The famous spells and chapters that modern readers call the Book of the Dead were not a single fixed book in the modern sense, but a collection of funerary texts copied in different selections for different people. They offered guidance for the journey after death, and their survival in tombs owes much to Egypt's dry sands and sealed spaces. A temple library might not have resembled a grand hall with open shelves. It may have consisted of storerooms, chests, niches, or cupboards where scrolls were tied, labeled, and protected. The roll itself often had a tag, allowing a keeper to identify it without unrolling the whole text. The care of scrolls involved practical attention, keeping them dry, safe from insects, and organized enough to be useful. Imagine a scribe in a temple precinct near the Nile. Outside, the river moves quietly in its season. Date palms stir. The walls hold painted scenes of offerings and gods. Inside, in a cooler room, a roll is unwrapped. The scribe dips a reed brush into black ink, then red. Red might mark headings, divisions, names of dangerous beings, or important instructions. The work is careful, but not hurried. The scribe is part of a chain that reaches backward to teachers and forward to ceremonies not yet performed. Egyptian libraries also lived through the ordinary business of the state. Grain accounts, land registers, labor lists, letters, and legal documents filled archives. Many papyri survive not because they were cherished as literature, but because they were discarded in dry places, reused in cartonnage, or buried. Ancient rubbish heaps can become modern treasure houses, though the word treasure should be used gently. What they preserve is often daily life: petitions, tax records, receipts, private letters, school exercises, and fragments of poems. The lost scrolls of Egypt are countless. Most papyrus has vanished. The Nile Valley could be dry, but not everywhere, and papyrus is vulnerable. Yet the surviving fragments are enough to show a rich literary and scientific world. Stories such as Sinu, wisdom texts, love songs, medical papyri like the Ebers Papyrus, mathematical texts like the Rind Mathematical Papyrus, and many administrative documents that make ancient society more human and specific. For sleep, the Egyptian library offers a soft scene of order beside a river. Scrolls lie in chests. Labels hang from cords. A lamp flickers. Somewhere beyond the wall, water and wind continue their ancient rhythm. The house of life is quiet for the night, holding its words until morning. Alexandria and the dream of gathering everything. No ancient library has attracted more imagination than the Library of Alexandria. It stood, in some form, within the intellectual world of Ptolemaic Egypt, after Alexander's conquests and the founding of the city that bore his name. The library was associated with the Mauseon, a sanctuary of the Muses, and a scholarly institution supported by the Ptolemaic kings. It became a symbol of ambition, the dream of gathering all knowledge, or at least all Greek books, into one royal center beside the Mediterranean. The details are often uncertain, and it is important to be calm with uncertainty. Ancient sources disagree or speak from later perspectives. The library was not destroyed in one simple, cinematic moment where all ancient wisdom vanished at once. Rather, the institution seems to have suffered over time through political conflict, changing patronage, war, neglect, and the broader transformations of the ancient world. The story of Alexandria is not a single flame, but a long fading, with moments of damage and survival interwoven. Still, the dream itself was real enough to shape history. The Ptolemies collected scrolls aggressively. Stories tell of ships arriving in Alexandria and being required to surrender books for copying, with originals sometimes kept and copies returned. Whether every detail is literal or embellished, the tradition conveys a royal hunger for texts. Scrolls came from across the Greek-speaking world and beyond. Scholars compared versions of Homer, edited poets, studied grammar, mapped geography, investigated mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and natural philosophy. The library required people as much as scrolls. Xenodotus, Callimachus, Eratosthenes, Aristophanes of Byzantium, Aristarchus of Samothrace, and others are associated with Alexandrian scholarship. Callimachus is said to have compiled the Pinakes, a vast bibliographic work that classified authors and texts. If we imagine the Pinakes, we are imagining an ancient attempt to bring order to abundance. Names, genres, titles, opening lines, and attributions arranged so that a sea of scrolls could be navigated. Alexandria was a city of harbors, palaces, temples, workshops, languages, and trade. A scholar there might hear Greek in one street, Egyptian in another, and the speech of sailors and merchants from many coasts. The library's scrolls were not merely stored, they were read, corrected, compared, and interpreted. The act of scholarship could be as quiet as noting a variant word in the margin, yet such small acts shaped the texts later generations inherited. Imagine entering the library in a restful way, without crowds or drama. The air carries the faint smell of papyrus, dust, wood, oil lamps, and sea air. Scrolls are stored in cases or pigeonholes. Tags identify works by author and title. A reader requests a roll. It is brought, unwrapped, and placed in the hands. The columns of writing appear one after another. Outside, the Mediterranean breathes against the harbor walls. The losses of Alexandria are immense because the symbol is immense. People often imagine that if only the library had survived intact, we would possess whole literatures now missing. Plays, histories, scientific treatises, poems, maps, and commentaries. That may be true in spirit, though no library can preserve everything against all time. Texts also disappear when people stop copying them. In a manuscript culture, survival depends on renewal. A book lives when someone chooses to make another copy. Alexandria teaches us both aspiration and humility. It shows the beauty of organized curiosity, the wish to gather, compare, translate, and understand. It also reminds us that even the greatest collections are mortal. A library can be famous across centuries and still vanish almost completely as a physical place. What remains may be quotations, catalog references, later copies, and the enduring image of shelves beside the sea. Pergamum and the Parchment Road. Across the eastern Mediterranean, another great center of learning rose at Pergamum in western Anatolia. The kingdom of Pergamum became an important Hellenistic power, and its rulers supported art, architecture, scholarship, and book collecting. Ancient tradition often places its library in rivalry with Alexandria. The details are difficult to separate from legend, but the comparison is useful. Alexandria and Pergamum together show how libraries could become symbols of prestige, identity, and cultured rule. Pergamum is also linked, in tradition, with parchment. The word parchment is related to Pergamum through Latin and Greek forms, though animal skins had been used for writing long before. A famous story says that Egypt restricted the export of papyrus, perhaps to hinder Pergamum's library, prompting Pergamene craftsmen to improve parchment production. Whether this happened exactly as told is uncertain. But parchment did become one of the major writing materials of the ancient and medieval worlds. Parchment is made from prepared animal skin, often sheep, goat, or calf. It is stronger than papyrus, can be folded more easily, and is well suited to the Codex, the book form with pages that eventually replaced the scroll for most literary use. In the age of Pergamum, scrolls still dominated Greek literary culture, but the future of the book was already hidden in the qualities of the material. Parchment could be scraped, smoothed, ruled, written, erased, and reused. The library at Pergamum was associated with the city's acropolis, near temples and royal monuments. It would have been a place where political display and intellectual life met. A ruler who collected books was claiming connection to Greek culture, to memory, to civilized order. Scholars and readers gave life to the collection. Without readers, a library is only stored material. With readers, it becomes a conversation across time. Imagine the hill of Pergamum in evening light. The theater falls steeply down the slope. Marble and stone hold the warmth of the day. In a library room, scrolls are arranged with care. The city below grows quiet. A scholar checks a passage in a historian. Another compares a poetic line. A servant replaces a roll. The air is dry, and the shelves wait. Pergamum's later history also enters the story of lost libraries. According to Plutarch, Mark Antony gave the library of Pergamum to Cleopatra, perhaps to replenish Alexandrian losses. Modern scholars debate the truth of this report. It may be political gossip, exaggeration, or partial memory. Yet the story is revealing because it imagines libraries as movable wealth. Scrolls could be transported, gifted, seized, or dispersed. A collection might belong to a city one generation and to another place the next. Pergamum helps us think about rivalry without noise. The ancient Mediterranean was full of cities competing through temples, theaters, schools, monuments, and libraries. To gather texts was to gather honor. But beneath that public ambition were quieter practices: copying, correcting, storing, and teaching. A library's reputation might be royal, but its survival depended on humble routines. When we think of parchment, we can let the mind rest on texture. Unlike papyrus, with its plant fibers and pale strips, parchment has the memory of skin. It can be smooth, slightly translucent, resistant, and enduring. Many later manuscripts owe their survival to this material. Even when a parchment book was scraped and reused, the earlier writing sometimes remained faintly visible, like an old path under snow. So Pergamum gives us a hillside library, a legend of materials, and a reminder that knowledge often travels by uncertain routes. Scrolls move, stories change. A name remains attached to material, and the material carries words into the future. Private libraries in Greece and Rome. Not every ancient library was royal or public. Many were private collections gathered by philosophers, teachers, aristocrats, officials, physicians, poets, and wealthy households. To own books in antiquity could be expensive, but not impossible for the educated elite. A private library might contain a few treasured rolls or a substantial collection arranged in a special room. These smaller libraries were vulnerable, intimate, and important. In classical Greece, books circulated among thinkers, teachers, and students. The exact size and nature of early collections can be hard to know, but philosophical schools depended on written texts as well as oral teaching. Aristotle and his school, the Lyceum, became associated with a major scholarly collection. Later traditions about the fate of Aristotle's books are tangled, involving inheritance, concealment, damage, and eventual recovery. Whether every detail is reliable or not, the story captures a real danger. Books could disappear simply by passing into the wrong storage conditions. A scroll in a private house had to be protected from damp, insects, and careless handling. It might be kept in a cylindrical container, a wooden cabinet, a chest, or a wall niche. Labels helped identify works. Reading was often done aloud, whether by the owner, a slave reader, or a companion. The ancient book was social in ways that differ from modern silent reading. A text might be heard in a small room discussed at dinner, recited in a school, or copied for a friend. In Rome, book collecting became a mark of cultivation. Wealthy Romans displayed libraries in villas and townhouses. Some collections were carefully used, others may have served partly as decoration, a way of showing Greek learning and refined taste. Roman authors sometimes joked about people who owned books they never read. The joke itself is familiar across centuries. A library can be a working tool, a beloved refuge, or a symbol of who one wishes to be. One of the most extraordinary private libraries known from antiquity was preserved at Herculaneum, buried by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE. The so-called Villa of the Papyri contained hundreds of carbonized scrolls. They were not preserved in comfort, but in disaster. The heat transformed them into fragile black rolls, easily mistaken at first for lumps of charcoal. Many contain Greek philosophical texts, especially associated with Epicurean thought and the philosopher Philodemus. The Herculaneum papyri are both found and still partly lost. Early attempts to open them often damaged them. Modern imaging techniques have made it possible to read some texts without unrolling them physically, and research continues. It is a profoundly quiet kind of recovery. Letters appearing from inside a scroll that has been closed since the 1st century. The library reminds us that not all lost scrolls are gone beyond reach. Some are hidden in forms too fragile to touch. Imagine a Roman villa before the eruption, not in panic, but in an ordinary afternoon long before the final day. The sea is nearby. Light enters through a peristyle garden. Shelves hold rolls in Greek and perhaps Latin. A reader selects a philosophical text, not because he expects history to preserve it, but because he wishes to think for an hour. He unrolls the papyrus, reads a column, and lets the argument unfold. Private libraries also shaped the transmission of literature. A text copied in one household could be borrowed and copied again. A letter collection might survive because descendants valued it. A poem might vanish because no one made another copy when the old roll cracked. In manuscript culture, loss did not always require violence. It could happen through indifference, fashion, language change, or the slow wearing out of materials. The private library is perhaps the easiest to imagine at bedtime. It is small enough for one lamp, a few shelves, a chair, a table, a roll tied with cord. Outside, the household grows still. Inside, a reader pauses at the end of a line, and the room holds its breath. Scrolls in the desert, Qumran, and other hidden texts. Some ancient texts survived because they were hidden in dry places. The most famous example is the Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered beginning in 1947 in caves near Qumran, close to the northwest shore of the Dead Sea. These scrolls and fragments, dating roughly from the 3rd century BCE to the 1st century CE, include biblical manuscripts, sectarian writings, commentaries, hymns, rules, calendars, and other texts. They are among the most important manuscript discoveries of the 20th century. The scrolls were written mostly in Hebrew, with some Aramaic and Greek. Their materials include parchment and papyrus. Many were found in fragments, sometimes tiny, requiring painstaking reconstruction. The caves preserved them because the environment was dry, though time still did its work. A scroll left for 2,000 years does not wait unchanged. It darkens, cracks, breaks, and mingles with dust. The community associated with Qumran is often connected with the Essenes, a Jewish group described by ancient authors, though the relationship is still discussed by scholars. It is best for our sleepy journey to avoid pretending that every question is settled. What matters here is the sense of a community that valued texts deeply, copying, interpreting, arranging rules of life, and preserving sacred writings in a time of tension. Imagine the desert at evening. The heat drains from the stones. The Dead Sea lies low and still, reflecting a dim sky. In a cave, jars rest in shadow. Some hold scrolls wrapped in linen. The outside world is silent except for wind. The texts inside contain laws, prayers, prophecies, hopes, disputes, and calendars, all written by hands that could not know how long the jars would remain closed. The Dead Sea Scrolls changed the study of the Hebrew Bible and Second Temple Judaism. They provided manuscripts older than many previously known copies, showing both continuity and textual variety. Some biblical books appear in forms very close to later traditional texts. Others show differences that reveal a living manuscript culture. The scrolls also opened a window onto religious ideas and practices in the centuries around the turn of the era. Desert discoveries are not limited to Qumran. Egypt's dry sands have preserved letters, contracts, literary fragments, and religious texts in large numbers. At Oxyrhynchus, an ancient city in Middle Egypt, rubbish mounds yielded a vast collection of papyri, including everyday documents and fragments of Greek literature. Some pieces preserve works otherwise lost or only partly known. A rubbish heap under dry conditions can become a library by accident. There is a gentle lesson in accidental preservation. Ancient people did not always save what later scholars most desired. They discarded drafts, accounts, broken documents, and worn-out texts. They reused papyrus. They wrapped objects with old writing. They left documents in abandoned rooms. Time, climate, and chance made selections no librarian intended. The desert is a slow archivist. It does not care which text is famous. It preserves what dryness allows. A shopping list may survive where a masterpiece does not. A school exercise may remain while a library catalog vanishes. This randomness can feel melancholy, but also tender. It means that history is full of small voices, not only grand ones. For rest, let the desert scene be spacious and quiet. A cave, a jar, a folded cloth, a scroll at peace in darkness. The wind passes over the limestone cliffs, and the words wait without hurry. What was lost when scrolls disappeared? To speak of lost scrolls is to speak carefully. It is tempting to imagine a single hidden shelf containing all the answers. Lost plays of Sophocles, missing histories of Rome, technical treatises, maps, poems, medical knowledge, and private letters from people whose names we know only in fragments. But the past is not a puzzle box designed for us. It is a vast field of human activity, much of which was never meant to last. In Greek tragedy, for example, only a small portion of the plays by Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides survive complete. Ancient sources give titles of many lost works. We can sometimes glimpse them through quotations, summaries, face paintings, or later references. A title may remain like a doorway with no room beyond it. The same is true for historians, philosophers, scientists, poets, and commentators. Ancient bibliographies and citations tell us that whole shelves once existed where now there are only names. Roman literature, too, is full of absence. We have portions of Livy's great history, but much is missing. We have some works of Cicero, but not all. We have fragments of early Latin poets, lost speeches, lost technical works, lost biographies, and lost archives of public and private life. Even famous authors survived unevenly, depending on copying, school use, religious acceptability, availability of manuscripts, and luck. Scientific and technical texts faced particular risks. Works on engineering, medicine, mathematics, agriculture, astronomy, and mechanics might be copied when useful, but usefulness changes. If a later culture preferred another authority, an older one could fade. If a text required diagrams, tables, or specialized vocabulary, copying it accurately was harder. Some ancient knowledge may have been transmitted through practice rather than books, leaving fewer written traces. Loss also came through changes in book form. The shift from scroll to codex was gradual and transformative. The codex, with pages bound along one edge, became increasingly common in the Roman world and dominant in late antiquity, especially among Christians. Texts that were copied from scroll into codex had a better chance of survival in the medieval manuscript tradition. Texts that were not recopied might remain on aging rolls until they decayed. Language change mattered as well. A text in a script or language no longer widely read was more vulnerable. Cuneiform disappeared as a living writing system. Egyptian scripts changed and eventually became unreadable until modern decipherment. Greek and Latin survived through educational and religious institutions, but not equally for all genres. A library can hold a text, but if no one can read it, the text enters a different kind of darkness. Fire is the dramatic enemy of libraries, but damp may be more patient. Insects, mold, broken roofs, war, neglect, and ordinary use all contribute. A frequently read book wears out. A rarely read book may be forgotten. A politically unwelcome book may be destroyed. A book in a conquered city may be looted, moved, or left to rot. No single explanation covers the losses of antiquity, yet fragments can be generous. A quotation in a later author can preserve a line of a lost poem. A palimpsest can reveal erased writing beneath a newer text. A papyrus fragment can add a few sentences to a known work. An inscription can confirm a name. A tablet can preserve a version of a myth older than the one we expected. History often returns in small pieces, like leaves drifting back across water. So tonight, when we think of lost scrolls, we need not feel only sorrow. Loss is part of the atmosphere of ancient history, but so is survival. The fact that anything remains is remarkable. Every fragment is a guest from a vanished room. Every copied text is a chain of choices, each link made by someone who thought it worth the time. The work of scribes and librarians. Behind every ancient library stands the steady work of scribes and keepers. Their labor was often repetitive, exacting, and quiet. A scribe might spend hours copying a text line by line, checking a difficult word, trimming a reed pen, preparing ink, ruling lines, smoothing parchment, or repairing a damaged roll. A librarian or keeper might arrange texts, maintain catalogs, supervise copies, assist readers, and protect the collection from disorder. Training began with signs and exercises. In Mesopotamian scribal schools, students copied lists, words, signs, professions, animals, places, and model phrases. Repetition built memory and discipline. In Egypt, student exercises on ostraca or wooden boards show practice, correction, and the formation of a scribal hand. In the Greek and Roman worlds, education involved reading, recitation, grammar, rhetoric, and the copying or discussion of admired texts. Copying was never purely mechanical. A scribe had to interpret the exemplar, the text being copied. Was a mark a letter or a stain? Was a word abbreviated? Did a line accidentally repeat or skip? Errors could enter through the eye, the ear, the hand, or memory. Sometimes a scribe corrected an apparent error that was not an error at all. Sometimes a marginal note slipped into the main text in a later copy. Sometimes different versions coexisted, and a scholar had to decide which reading seemed best. Ancient scholarship developed tools for managing textual variation. Alexandrian scholars used critical signs to mark doubtful lines in Homer. Commentaries explained rare words, mythological references, grammar, and interpretation. Glossaries and lexicons helped readers navigate older or specialized language. Catalogs made collections usable. These tools may sound dry, but they are acts of care. They say, the text deserves attention, and future readers deserve guidance. The physical routines were equally important. Papyrus rolls had to be kept from moisture. Parchment could curl or stiffen. Tablets had to be sorted. Scroll tags had to remain attached. Shelves, jars, boxes, and cupboards had to be maintained. A collection could become useless if no one knew where anything was. The dream of total knowledge depends on small labels. Imagine a library keeper at the end of a day. Readers have gone. A roll is returned to its place. A tag is checked. A lamp is lowered. The keeper notices a frayed edge and sets the scroll aside for repair. Nothing dramatic has happened, yet the future has been altered. Because of that small act, the scroll may last another generation. Scribes were not always free scholars. Many were servants, temple personnel, state officials, monks, or professional copyists working for patrons. Their status varied widely. Some signed their work proudly. Others remain anonymous. In many traditions, the copyist's humility is part of the manuscript's silence. We know the author, perhaps, but not the person whose hand carried the words across centuries. The work could also be devotional. In religious communities, copying sacred texts was a form of service. Accuracy mattered not only for meaning, but for reverence. Later monastic scriptoria would inherit this attitude, preserving many classical and religious works through disciplined copying. The ancient library did not end all at once. Its habits flowed into new institutions. For our sleepy purposes, the scribe is a calming figure. The page is before them. The line is clear. The hand moves slowly. Outside, history may be restless, but here there is a measured rhythm. Dip, write, pause, breathe, continue. The library survives through such rhythms. From scroll to codex, the ancient world began for many literary cultures, with the scroll as the familiar form of the book. A scroll suited continuous reading. It had a beginning and an end, and the reader moved through it by unrolling with one hand and rolling with the other. Text was arranged in columns. Finding a particular passage required skill, memory, and patience. The scroll has a graceful slowness about it, a sense of reading as gradual revelation. The Codex changed that experience. Made of folded sheets bound along one side, the Codex allowed writing on both sides of a leaf, easier reference to separate passages, and more compact storage for longer works. It could be opened near the middle, marked, compared, and carried differently. The transition did not happen overnight. Scrolls and codices coexisted for centuries, but by late antiquity, the Codex had become the dominant form for many communities. Early Christians were especially associated with the Codex, though the reasons are debated. Practicality, identity, economy, and the need to gather multiple texts may all have played roles. A codex could hold the four Gospels together, or collections of letters, or scriptural books arranged for study. As Christian institutions grew, their copying habits shaped which texts were preserved, how they were organized, and what book form became standard. This transition affected ancient libraries profoundly. A room built for scrolls might have to adapt to books with pages. Cataloging changed. Storage changed. Reading posture changed. A codex lies open in a way a scroll does not. It invites comparison between pages and easier return to a passage. It also made possible new habits of annotation and reference. But the shift also created a moment of danger. To survive, older works often needed to be transferred from worn scrolls into codices. If no one chose to copy a work, it might disappear. The survival of classical literature, therefore, depended partly on late antique and medieval decisions about what was useful, beautiful, orthodox, educational, or available. Some texts crossed the bridge into codex culture. Others remained behind. The codex did not guarantee survival. Manuscripts still burned, decayed, or were discarded, but it created the ancestor of the modern book. When we open a printed book today, or read a digital page that imitates turning pages, we are living in the long shadow of that transition. Parchment became especially important in codex form. It was durable and could be folded into gatherings. Yet it was costly. Producing a large manuscript required many animal skins and much labor. This cost encouraged reuse. A parchment manuscript could be scraped to remove old writing and then written over, creating a palimpsest. To the original owner, this might have been ordinary economy. To modern scholars, it can be a hidden archive. The Archimedes palimpsest is a famous example from much later manuscript history. It preserves, beneath a Christian prayer book, erased copies of works by Archimedes and other texts. Modern imaging has recovered writing that seemed lost. The example shows how loss and survival can occupy the same page. One text covers another, but not completely. Memory sleeps beneath memory. In a quiet room, the Codex has its own restful presence. Pages lie stacked like thin layers of time. A hand turns one leaf. The sound is small. Unlike the scroll, which moves horizontally through columns, the Codex deepens downward, page after page. It is a well of paper or parchment. The reader lowers attention into it. From scroll to Codex, ancient words changed their bodies. Some survived the change. Some did not. The library itself learned a new shape, and in that shape, many older voices continued their slow journey. A quiet walk through a lost library. Now let us gather the pieces of our journey into one imagined library. Not because such a place existed exactly, but because the mind can rest in a gentle composite. It stands somewhere between river and desert, between palace and temple, between city and sea. It is evening. The day's heat has faded. The first stars appear. The entrance is modest. No trumpet sounds. A stone threshold has been worn smooth by many feet. Inside, the air is cool. The walls are lined with niches and wooden shelves. Some hold clay tablets, their surfaces marked with small wedges. Others hold papyrus rolls, tied with cords and labeled with tags. In a chest nearby, parchment leaves wait under a cloth. A few wax tablets lie on a table, ready for notes that may be erased tomorrow. A lamp burns low. Its flame moves only slightly. The room smells of dust, clay, plant fiber, oil, and dry wood. There are no crowds now. The scholars, scribes, priests, officials, and students have gone to their meals or beds. The library is in the hour when objects seem to settle into themselves. On one shelf rests a tablet from a series of omens, part 12 of a larger work. Beside it is a lexical list, the kind a student copied many times. In a jar stands a roll of poetry, its first line written on a small tag. Another roll contains accounts of grain. Another, a hymn. Another, a medical recipe mixing observation, tradition, and hope. A parchment gathering holds a copied dialogue. In the corner, a damaged scroll waits for repair. Nothing here is complete in the way we might wish. A tablet is chipped. A roll has lost its outer edge. A label has faded. A colophon names a scribe whose life is otherwise unknown. But the room does not feel poor. It feels patiently full. The fragments do not complain. They hold what they can. If you listen in imagination, you may hear the day's work lingering. A reed pen set down. A teacher correcting a student's sign. A reader murmuring a difficult line. A librarian asking for the title again. A servant carrying a box of scrolls. A scholar comparing two copies and pausing over a difference. These sounds have ended, but the room remembers them. Outside, a breeze passes. Perhaps it comes from the Nile, or the Tigris, or the Mediterranean, or the dry hills above the Dead Sea. This imagined library belongs to all of them and none of them. It is a resting place for the idea of preservation. Walk slowly along the shelves. Do not take anything. Do not search for a secret. Simply notice. Clay remembers pressure. Papyrus remembers water and sun. Parchment remembers skin and scraping. Ink remembers soot, gum, minerals, and the hand that mixed it. Labels remember the hope that someone would return the text to the right place. At the far end of the room, a small window admits the last blue of evening. Dust moves in the air. The lamp flame lowers. The library is not afraid of the dark. It has known darkness for most of its life. Texts spend more time closed than open. Their silence is not emptiness. It is waiting. This quiet walk can teach us a peaceful truth about history. We do not possess the past completely. We visit it through traces. We read by lamplight, not noon. But partial light is still light. A fragment can be enough to begin understanding. A broken shelf can still tell us that someone once cared. Soft ending. Our journey through ancient libraries and lost scrolls is nearly at rest. We began with the first marks pressed into clay and brushed onto papyrus. We visited the tablet rooms of Nineveh, the temple learning of Egypt, the great scholarly dream of Alexandria, the hillside prestige of Pergamum, the intimate libraries of Greek and Roman readers, the hidden scrolls of the desert, and the long passage from scroll to codex and beyond. Along the way, we have seen that a library is more than a building. It is a set of choices repeated over time. Someone writes, someone copies, someone stores, someone labels, someone teaches, someone repairs, someone reads aloud in a low voice. Someone decides, on an ordinary day, that this text should not be lost yet. We have also seen that loss is not always loud. It can be slow as damp in a wall, quiet as a language no longer taught, simple as a roll not recopied before it cracks. And survival is not always grand. It can be a broken tablet baked by fire, a papyrus scrap in a rubbish mound, a blackened scroll from Herculaneum, a jar in a desert cave, or erased writing beneath a later prayer. The ancient world did not leave us everything. It left us enough to wonder, enough to study, enough to feel the presence of minds that lived under other skies. Their libraries were mortal, but their gestures remain. To gather words is to hope gently against forgetting. Now the archive grows quiet. The lamps are being lowered. The scrolls are tied. The The tablets rest in their baskets. The Codex closes with a soft breath of pages. Outside, night covers the old cities. Nineveh beneath its mound, Alexandria by the sea, Pergamum on its hill, the Nile Valley under stars, the desert caves in stillness. You do not need to hold all the details. Let them settle. Clay, papyrus, parchment, ink, shelves, jars, chests, niches, scribes, readers, keepers, translators. A library in darkness, waiting patiently for morning. Thank you for spending this quiet time in the sleepy archive. Rest now, and let the lost scrolls sleep too.